old husband signed divorce papers laughing. He stopped smiling minutes later. Harold Whitman had spent most of his life believing that time itself answered to him. Decades of routine, authority, and unquestioned control had convinced him that nothing truly unexpected could happen anymore, especially not at his age. On the morning he walked into the lawyer's office to finalize his divorce, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who thought he was concluding a long, boring chapter, rather than opening a dangerous new one. His steps were steady, his shoulders squared, and his expression held a careless amusement, as though the entire event were little more than paperwork standing between him and a comfortable, unchallenged future. To Harold, this divorce was not a loss. It was a release, a final confirmation that he was still in charge of his life, his money, and his destiny. Eleanor Whitman entered the office quietly behind him, her presence barely noticeable at first glance, much like it had been for much of their marriage. She wore a simple coat, neatly pressed, and her hair was pulled back with the same careful precision she had always maintained. There was nothing dramatic about her appearance, nothing that demanded attention, and yet there was a quiet certainty in her posture that subtly altered the atmosphere of the room. She did not look around nervously, nor did she avoid Harold's gaze. Instead, she sat down calmly across from him, placing her purse beside her chair, folding her hands together, and waiting with the patience of someone who had already accepted what was about to happen. As the lawyer began reviewing the documents, Harold barely listened. His mind wandered to thoughts of quiet mornings without arguments, dinners without explanations, and a future where no one questioned his decisions. When the pen was finally placed in his hand, he signed without hesitation, letting out a laugh that was louder than necessary, the sound sharp and confident, echoing slightly off the walls. He made a remark about how long the process had taken, and joked about how paperwork always made things seem more serious than they really were. To him, the marriage had ended years ago in everything but name, and now even the name was gone. Eleanor watched him without expression as he signed, her eyes steady, her breathing slow. She felt no urge to interrupt him, no desire to argue or correct his tone. She had learned long ago that Harold's certainty thrived on resistance, and she no longer intended to feed it. When he finally slid the papers across the table and leaned back in his chair, smiling as though he had just closed a profitable deal, Eleanor simply nodded once, acknowledging the moment without emotion. That simple nod unsettled Harold more than anger ever could, though he did not yet understand why. Harold stood up, adjusting his jacket, his confidence swelling as he prepared to leave. He spoke casually about reclaiming his time, about enjoying the years he had left without complications, and about how change, even late in life, could be refreshing. His laughter returned briefly as he reached for the door, already mentally stepping into what he assumed would be a simpler, easier existence. That was when the lawyer spoke again, his voice cautious, asking Harold to wait just a moment longer. The request irritated him. Harold disliked delays, especially when he believed everything was already settled. But he turned back, annoyance flashing across his face, and dropped back into his chair with a sigh. The lawyer opened another folder, this one thicker, heavier, filled with documents that had not been part of the discussion until now. As he began to explain the formal review of marital assets, Harold waved his hand dismissively, insisting there was no need to go over things already understood. He spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to being believed without proof. But the lawyer's expression did not change. Slowly and carefully, he explained that several of the assets Harold assumed were his had been legally transferred years earlier, fully documented, fully binding, and entirely valid. The house they had lived in for decades was not in Harold's name. The investment accounts he bragged about at dinners were not under his control. Even certain properties Harold had considered personal achievements were owned by a private trust he had never bothered to examine closely. At first, Harold laughed again, a sharp, disbelieving sound, insisting there had to be some mistake. He looked at Eleanor, expecting to see guilt, confusion, or perhaps even fear, but found none of it. She remained seated, calm and composed, as though the lawyer were simply reciting known facts rather than delivering life-altering revelations. As the truth sank in, Harold's laughter faded, replaced by a tightening in his chest. A slow realization that his confidence had been built on assumptions rather than knowledge. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier, as decades of certainty began to unravel in the span of a few sentences. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice steady and measured, not raised, not sharp, but firm with honesty. She explained that while Harold had focused on appearances, titles, and control, she had focused on understanding, planning, and protection. She reminded him that she had asked questions over the years that he dismissed, that she had read documents he ignored, and that she had learned to safeguard her future quietly, without announcement or drama. She did not accuse him. She simply stated facts, each one landing with quiet precision. Harold's anger flared briefly, but it had nowhere to go. There was no argument to win, no authority to assert. Everything she said was backed by signatures he barely remembered placing, and decisions he had never thought to question. As the lawyer continued explaining the legal standing of the assets, Harold felt something unfamiliar settle over him, not panic, but exposure. For the first time in his life, he realized how little he truly knew about the systems he had trusted blindly. His identity as a provider, a decision-maker, a man in control, began to crack under the weight of his own neglect. Eleanor stood slowly, gathering her purse, her movements unhurried. She did not gloat or linger. She simply stated that she never wanted revenge, only peace, and that peace required preparation. Then she walked out of the office, leaving behind silence, documents, and a man forced to confront the cost of his certainty. Minutes later, as Harold sat staring at the table, the lawyer cleared his throat and mentioned the assisted living arrangements Harold had previously selected, arrangements that now required confirmation of funding and approval from the rightful asset holder. The words hit Harold harder than anything else that day. The future he had imagined comfortable, independent, unquestioned, suddenly felt uncertain and fragile. Eleanor, now the quiet architect of her own security, had stepped forward without raising her voice or seeking validation. She had simply chosen herself, and in doing so, had rewritten the ending Harold thought he had already secured. Outside, Eleanor walked into the daylight, breathing deeply, feeling neither triumph nor regret. She felt something far more valuable, freedom earned through patience, understanding, and quiet resolve. The world did not change dramatically around her, but she had changed within it, and that was enough. Some endings do not come with raised voices or dramatic gestures. Some arrive softly, after years of preparation, leaving those who laughed at the beginning unable to smile when the truth finally speaks.